My name is Margaret Cooper, and the day I realized my neighbor knew more about my husband than I ever did was the day I stopped pretending my life was ordinary. I still remember the moment the air felt thick, like the whole world was holding its breath. Tom was standing in our kitchen staring at a photograph I'd just placed on the counter. His face had gone pale, like every secret he'd ever buried had clawed its way back to the surface. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Just stood there frozen, as if the truth itself had turned him to stone. People think betrayal comes with noise, shouting, slammed doors, tears. They're wrong. Sometimes it's quiet, so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat, asking questions you never wanted to ask. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how that moment came to be, you have to know about Maple Grove Lane, the street that never seemed to change. For 15 years, it was the same rhythm every day. Tom's truck backing out at 7:30 sharp, the hum of lawnmowers on weekends, the clink of wind chimes from Mrs. Donnelly's porch across the road. People here didn't talk much about their private lives. We waved, we smiled, and we went back to our business. Safety and routine, that's what we believed in. Our house sat near the end of the cul-de-sac with a fence that separated our yard from the property next door. For a long time, that house belonged to the Bennetts, a quiet older couple who moved to Florida after retirement. When the for sale sign went up, I remember feeling oddly nervous, like something was about to shift. Change had never been my favorite thing. Then, one early spring morning, a moving truck appeared, and with it, Claire Thompson. She was in her mid-40s, slender with a calm, careful way of moving. She smiled politely, thanked the movers, and worked through boxes like someone who'd done this before, not once, but many times. I baked banana bread that afternoon because that's what decent neighbors do. When I brought it over, she opened the door wearing a soft blue sweater and that same quiet smile. "Starting fresh," she said, almost apologetically. "Just me now." Her voice had a softness to it, something measured, practiced. I could tell she was used to holding things back. Tom met her a few days later when he helped carry in a heavy bookshelf. They chatted briefly on her porch, and she thanked him with a bottle of sweet tea. I thought nothing of it at the time, he was just being polite. That's who Tom was, steady, helpful, predictable. Over the weeks, Claire and I found a rhythm. Coffee on her porch every Wednesday morning, trading recipes, talking about the weather and local news. She had this way of listening, really listening, that made you feel like your thoughts mattered. But there were moments, small ones, that tugged at something uneasy inside me. Whenever Tom walked by heading to the garage, watering the lawn, her gaze followed him just a little too long, and sometimes he'd greet her with a tone that felt too familiar for such a new neighbor. Still, I brushed it off. We were middle-aged adults in a quiet Indiana town, not characters in a soap opera. One afternoon, as we sat on her porch sipping coffee, Claire mentioned she used to live up north. "Michigan?" I asked. Further, she said, her eyes shifting toward my house for just a second too long. Life takes you to strange places sometimes. There was something in her tone that unsettled me, like a truth hiding between the words. But before I could ask, she smiled and changed the subject to roses and soil pH. Back then, I thought the unease would pass. But looking back, that was the first thread coming loose. Our life had always been so ordinary. Tom worked at the local bank. I managed accounts for a small charity. Evenings were dinner and television, weekends were errands and Sunday service. But after Claire moved in, the silence between Tom and me started to feel heavier. He'd zone out at dinner, answer questions half-heartedly, and occasionally hum old songs I'd never heard him hum before. One night as we washed dishes side by side, I noticed the faintest smile tug at his lips when I mentioned Claire's name, a smile he quickly hid under the sound of running water. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But a small, sharp corner of doubt had lodged itself in my chest, and no amount of pretending could wash it away. That summer, Tom built a small shelf for the hallway. He said he needed to organize the photo boxes. I watched him flip through old prints, smiling at memories, sometimes setting a few aside. He didn't notice me watching. When he left the room, I peeked into one of the boxes he'd closed too quickly. Inside were old photos, family trips, friends' vacations. Nothing strange. But one photo was missing the corner edges still indented where it had been. It was such a small thing. But the next morning, I saw Claire standing in her yard, holding a photo in her hand, her thumb brushing its edge before she slipped it into her pocket. That's when I felt it, the chill you get when something familiar suddenly feels foreign, like realizing your own house might not be as safe as you thought. That night, as Tom kissed me goodnight, his lips felt cold. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, wondering how long the ghosts had been there, right before me, and how I'd never noticed. The next morning, I woke up early to the sound of rain against the window. The kind of steady, half-sad rain that makes you feel like the world's been washed clean, except it hasn't. I watched droplets slide down the glass and tried to shake off the unease from the night before. But something had shifted inside me, something I couldn't name. For the first time in years, I didn't make Tom's coffee. I just sat at the kitchen table listening to him shuffle around, tie his shoes, and leave for work. The front door closed with a soft click, and I exhaled. The house felt too quiet. That was when I decided to do something I'd never done in our 15 years of marriage. I went into his office. Tom's office wasn't really an office. It was more like a corner of the spare room filled with tax folders, banking forms, and boxes of forgotten things. The air smelled faintly of paper and cedar polish. I told myself I was just looking for an old receipt, but my hands seemed to move on their own, opening drawers I hadn't touched before. In the second drawer, down beneath a pile of loose envelopes, I found an old photograph tucked into a yellowed envelope. Tom, 10 years younger, standing on a beach, his arm around a woman whose face I knew all too well. Claire. The ocean stretched behind them, the sun low and golden. They were smiling in that way only two people in love can smile, easy, unguarded. The date written on the back read, Cape May Summer, so 9. That summer, Tom had told me he went on a solo banking seminar in New Jersey. I remember him calling once saying he missed me but was exhausted. I remember believing him. My fingers trembled as I put the photo back into the envelope. For a long time, I just sat there trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they'd run into each other after years apart. But deep down, I knew better. The worst part wasn't that he'd loved someone else. It was that she'd been standing in my kitchen just days ago, smiling, pretending to be my friend. That evening, I watched them through the kitchen window as Tom helped Claire carry a heavy bag of soil across her yard. She laughed at something he said, that same soft, familiar laugh from the photograph. He looked up, caught me watching, and gave a small wave, casual as ever. I forced myself to wave back. When he came inside, his face was pink from the sun. She needed a hand with her garden, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I smiled. You've always been helpful. He hesitated, maybe sensing the edge in my voice, then shrugged it off. That night, when he fell asleep, I got up and went to the kitchen. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, painting thin white stripes across the floor. I laid the photograph on the table and stared at it for what felt like hours. That was when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. Not until I understood everything. The next morning, I began my quiet investigation. I started small, watching, noting. When Tom left for work, Claire would often be out watering her flowers. Once I saw her pick up her phone, smile faintly, and whisper something before walking back inside. Another day, I noticed a letter in her mailbox, addressed to C. Whitman. Not Thompson. Whitman. My heart raced as I took a photo of the envelope with my phone. That night, I searched online for Claire Whitman, Indiana. It didn't take long to find an old local newspaper article from 2009, bank employee's fiancé moves out after sudden breakup. There was a small photo. Tom. Claire. Side by side. 15 years. He'd buried it that deep. The next week, I visited the county clerk's office pretending to research property taxes for the charity where I worked. I asked for the public deed record of the house next door. The clerk printed it for me without question. Buyer Claire Thompson, formerly Whitman. Purchase date 2 months before she moved in. Funding source private joint account co-signed by Thomas Cooper. My hand went cold as I read the name. Tom had closed a joint savings account years ago, telling me it wasn't accruing interest. I'd believed him, because that's what trust looks like when you're married long enough to stop asking questions. On the drive home, my mind replayed every moment, every smile, every dinner, every late meeting. I wasn't even angry yet. I was stunned, like someone had swapped out my entire life when I wasn't looking. That night, I placed the deed next to the photograph on the kitchen counter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 decades of lies. Tom came home late again. I didn't ask why. He kissed my cheek and I let him. Then I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, leaving the documents where he couldn't miss them in the morning. But when I woke up, they were gone. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was suffocating. Days passed. Claire continued smiling through her fence as if nothing had changed. Tom mowed both lawns again that weekend. When he came inside, sweat-drenched and silent, I asked, "Did she thank you?" He looked up, startled. "What for mowing her side?" I said lightly. "She must appreciate all the help." He stared at me, unsure whether I was teasing or accusing. I smiled. "Just being neighborly," I added, and walked away. That night he sat in the living room staring at the TV without watching it. The picture of us at our wedding, the one on the mantel, seemed to mock the silence between us. I poured myself a glass of wine, went to the porch, and looked at Claire's house. Her living room light was on. Through the sheer curtain, I could see her pacing, phone in hand. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or realizing how calm I felt. The anger hadn't arrived yet. Only clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood that the people closest to you could become strangers, and the strangers next door could be the ghosts of your past. The following week felt like a play I hadn't auditioned for, but was somehow starring in. Everyone said their lines. Everyone hit their marks except now. I could hear the lies humming beneath the surface. Tom left early each morning, sometimes without breakfast. He claimed things were busy at the bank, but I could tell his voice had changed, a little too careful, like a man rehearsing every word before saying it. Claire still waved from her porch, still asked about my day, still smiled with that soft, polite distance. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Her kindness had edges now. Every compliment felt like a test. I began keeping a small notebook, a quiet record of her comings and goings, the phone calls she took outside the times Tom's truck came home later than usual. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe because I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. One afternoon, I decided to clean out the hallway closet. It's the kind of chore you put off until you need to distract yourself from your own thoughts. Inside, behind a stack of old sweaters, I found a dusty box labeled Vacation 2009. I carried it to the kitchen, set it on the table, and opened it. There were postcard shells and a few pictures, but the one that caught my eye wasn't from the beach. It was from a wedding. Not ours. someone else's. Tom in a suit, Claire in a blue dress standing in the background like guests who belonged together. The date matched the same year as the Cape May photo. I leaned back in my chair, feeling that strange combination of shock and numbness. My husband's life had a second timeline, and I'd just stumbled into it. That evening when Tom came home, I waited until he went upstairs to shower. Then I slipped the wedding photo into the drawer beside his wallet. Not to confront him, not yet. But I wanted him to know the walls were closing in. The next morning, he left the drawer open. The picture was gone. Still, he didn't say a word. By now, my nerves had steadied into something sharper, not rage, but purpose. I needed to understand why. So I drove to the county records office again. The clerk recognized me from before. I smiled, politely asked to see any business licenses registered under the name Thomas Cooper. She typed, frowned, then turned the screen slightly. There it was, a short-term partnership dissolved a decade ago, co-signed by Claire Whitman, Purpose Consulting and Property Development. Property, the word hit like a hammer. He hadn't just helped her buy that house. He'd built the means to do it long before she moved next door. I thanked the clerk, left the office, and sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Outside, people walked by with umbrellas carrying groceries, talking about weekend plans, small-town normalcy that suddenly felt foreign. It was clear now. Claire hadn't moved here by coincidence. She'd chosen this house, this street, this proximity, as if she'd been waiting for an audience. A few days later, I ran into her outside the grocery store. She smiled the same practiced smile and asked, "How's Tom?" I froze for a heartbeat too long before answering, "Busy as always." Her eyes softened, almost pitying. "He's a good man. Sometimes men just get lost." That sentence replayed in my head the entire drive home. Sometimes men just get lost. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to yell, accuse, or cry. I was going to watch, really watch, until the truth showed itself in daylight. So I did. Every morning, I watered my roses at the same time Claire came outside. We exchanged pleasantries across the fence, pretending we didn't both know what was happening. There's a strange kind of power in silence, the kind that makes other people nervous. One morning, Tom left for work, but instead of turning toward downtown, he took the opposite road. I followed at a distance. His truck stopped at a small diner off the highway. A few minutes later, Claire's car pulled in beside him. They sat in a corner booth. I parked across the street, my heart pounding, but my mind steady. They talked for half an hour. I didn't need to hear the words their faces said enough. When they left, I stayed behind, went inside, and slipped the waitress a 20. "That couple that was just here," I said quietly. "They come often?" She smiled. "Oh, those two. Every Thursday, he always gets black coffee. She gets pie." I thanked her and walked out. That evening, I made chicken casserole, Tom's favorite. He looked surprised. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Of course. Just felt like cooking something nice." He relaxed, maybe thinking the storm had passed. He didn't notice the photo on my phone screen, the one I'd taken of his truck parked beside Claire's car. By the time July came, the neighborhood planned its annual summer cookout, a cheerful, harmless event where people brought pies and bragged about their lawns. Claire offered to host. Of course she did. When she came over to invite us, I watched her face closely. "It's just a small get-together," she said. "You and Tom should come." I smiled. We wouldn't miss it. That night, I looked at the deed, the photos, and the partnership papers spread across my table like puzzle pieces. It all fit now, every kindness, every coincidence, every friendly smile. But revenge, I realized, didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to destroy. It just had to reveal. So I planned quietly. I didn't know how yet, but I knew the stage was set. The house, the neighbors, the summer light, the people who'd see what I'd seen all along. And when that day came, I promised myself I wouldn't yell, I'd smile. The kind of smile that says I know everything now. The summer cookout arrived with the kind of sunshine that made everything look too perfect. The trimmed lawns, the red, white, blue banners, the kids racing their bikes down the cul-de-sac. The smell of grilled corn and barbecue floated through the air, mixing with the sound of easy laughter. Maple Grove Lane was performing its annual ritual of pretending life was flawless. Claire's yard looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. White tablecloths, mason jars with flowers, lemonade in glass pitchers. She was wearing a pale yellow sundress and that same gentle smile that made people trust her. I watched from my porch for a moment before joining the crowd, every step deliberate. Tom was already there, flipping burgers at the grill, like the perfect suburban husband. He waved when he saw me too eagerly, as if overcompensating for something invisible between us. Claire stood beside him, handing out plates. They looked coordinated, comfortable, practiced. When I walked up, conversations dimmed just a little, then resumed. Small towns have their own radar. People sense tension, even when no one speaks it aloud. Margaret Claire called brightly, "I saved you a seat." I smiled, polite and warm. How thoughtful. We sat at the same picnic table, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and suspicion. Every so often, I'd catch Tom glancing between us, his eyes restless. He knew something was shifting. After lunch, someone suggested a group photo, a yearly tradition. Claire insisted on organizing it, fussing over who stood where. "Tom, you stand here." Margaret may be beside him, she said, motioning with the confidence of someone too comfortable giving orders. I took my spot, smiled for the camera, and noticed just before the shutter clicked the way her hand brushed Tom's arm. Subtle, familiar. The flash went off. The photo was taken. But in that split second, I decided to take mine too. A mental picture of what the world didn't yet see. That night, after everyone went home, I downloaded the photo from the neighborhood group chat. The way Claire leaned toward Tom wasn't overt, but I could see it. The body language told a story only I seemed to recognize. I printed it and placed it beside the Cape May photo on our dining table. The years between them looked like one long lie that had finally found its echo. Tom came in around 10, still smelling faintly of smoke and sweat. He stopped when he saw the photos. "Where did you get these?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Does it matter?" I asked quietly. He sat down, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples. "It was a long time ago," he said. "It didn't mean anything anymore." "Then why is she next door?" I asked. "Why now?" He didn't answer. The silence filled the room like smoke. "Tom," I said, steady and calm, "did you help her buy that house?" He looked up sharply. The way his eyes darted told me the answer before his mouth did. "I wanted to help her," he murmured. "She was struggling. With your money or ours?" He didn't respond. His face turned the color of unbaked dough, pale, heavy, lifeless. That was when I realized I didn't need to scream. The truth was already punishing enough. For days after that, we coexisted like polite strangers, sharing the same address. He slept in the guest room, claiming he needed space to think. I let him. I'd done enough thinking for both of us. Claire didn't come around for a while, which told me Tom had said something. Guilt has a way of silencing even the boldest people. But guilt never lasts forever. By the second week, she was back in her garden pruning roses as if nothing had happened. I decided to test the calm. One morning, I walked over with a basket of muffins. "You've been quiet lately," I said. "Everything all right?" She blinked, studying me. "Oh, just busy. You know how it is." "I do," I replied. "Life gets complicated sometimes." There was a pause, brief loaded. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the version of me she'd been fooling. But that version no longer existed. Anyway, I said, smiling, Tom's been keeping to himself. You might not see him around as much. Her grip on the pruning shears tightened just slightly. I hadn't noticed she lied. Oh, I think you had. I turned, walked away, and left her standing in the morning sun, her shadow stretched long and thin against the fence. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow unraveling. Tom withdrew further. He stopped taking my calls during work hours. When I asked if he'd eaten, he'd just nod vaguely, eyes unfocused. I almost felt sorry for him almost. Then one evening I came home to find a small envelope on the counter. No note, just a key inside. His house key. I stared at it for a long time. The air felt still, like the moment before a thunderstorm. When I finally looked out the window, I saw Claire standing on her porch, arms folded, eyes fixed on my house. I lifted the blinds just enough for her to see me, then smiled. A quiet, deliberate smile. She turned away first. That was the moment I knew I had already won. Not because I'd shouted, not because I'd exposed them to the neighborhood, but because they couldn't hide anymore. Guilt had done the work for me. Still, something in me wanted closure, not revenge for revenge's sake, but a reckoning. A line drawn so cleanly that even they would have to see it. I didn't know it then, but the real confrontation wasn't going to happen inside a kitchen or through a fence. It would happen in the light of day, in front of others, where truth had nowhere left to hide. A week later, a letter came in the mail addressed to Thomas Cooper and Claire Whitman. The bank had mistakenly sent their joint account statement to our house. I stared at the names, bold and undeniable, side by side. It was all the confirmation I'd ever need. But instead of tearing it up, I slipped it into an envelope of my own, along with both photos. I sealed it and placed it neatly in Tom's truck that night. The next morning, he left early again. This time, he didn't come back until dusk. His face, when he walked through the door, said everything. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't have to. When night fell, I stood at the window watching Claire's porch light flicker on. The house that once seemed so calm now looked haunted, not by ghosts, but by truths finally exposed. I whispered to myself. They lived like ghosts right before me. Now they'll have to live with themselves. The days after that letter were strangely peaceful, the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but warns. You could almost hear the weight of what wasn't being said pressing against the walls. Tom and I moved through the house like strangers who had memorized each other's footsteps. We exchanged small talk about Bill's weather and the dog across the street that wouldn't stop barking, but never once did either of us mention her name. Claire. Outside, life went on. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers hissed across lawns, and the ice cream truck sang its tinny song every afternoon. But for me, Maple Grove Lane no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage, and every neighbor an unknowing witness. The annual summer barbecue had left a kind of aftertaste in the neighborhood. People smiled, but they'd seen too much, the glances, the silences. Midwestern towns have an unspoken code. They don't talk about scandal, but they don't forget it either. I could feel their eyes on me, the polite sympathy of people who wonder but won't ask. I didn't blame them. Let them wonder. Then one afternoon I saw Claire walking down the driveway with a for sale sign tucked under her arm. She set it in her front yard and hammered it into the soil. Each strike of the hammer sounded like punctuation, an ending written in iron and earth. I should have felt relief. I didn't. What I felt was something quieter, deeper, a slow burning realization that forgiveness and revenge sometimes share the same heartbeat. That evening, Tom came home early for the first time in weeks. He stood in the kitchen doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed in. I saw the sign, he said softly. I nodded. Looks like she's leaving. He looked away. It's better that way. I waited. He didn't continue. "She's selling the house you helped her buy," I said. "That must sting." He winced. "Margaret." I held up a hand. "Don't. Not tonight. I'm tired." He didn't argue, just nodded, took his jacket off the hook, and went out to the porch. I could hear the wooden steps creak under his weight, the same sound they'd made 1,000 times before, only heavier now. From the window, I watched him sit there for a long time, staring into the dark yard where 2 porch lights glowed, ours and hers. For a moment, I almost pitied him, the man who'd built his own prison out of lies and then had to live inside it. The next morning, Claire came over. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. She held a small basket of lavender, as if flowers could erase history. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I studied her. "How was it supposed to happen?" She hesitated. "He said you didn't understand him anymore, that he felt invisible." I almost laughed. Invisible. "We were married, Claire. I knew every rhythm of his life. You just wanted to hear the version of him that suited you." Her voice wavered. "You have every right to hate me." "Hate you?" I shook my head. "No. Hate takes effort. I'm done giving you that." I handed her back the lavender. "Plant this somewhere far away," I said quietly. "Let it remind you what you buried here." She blinked, tears forming. "You're stronger than I thought." "No," I said, "just done pretending." She turned, shoulders trembling, and walked back toward her porch. For the first time, she looked small, like a secret finally exposed to the sun. Tom didn't come home that night. I didn't call. I just sat by the window watching the streetlights blink on one by one. When I finally went to bed, I dreamt of the beach from that old photo, only this time I was standing there alone. The waves came in, washed over the footprints, and when the water receded, there was only one set left. Mine. The next morning, I woke to an empty driveway. His truck was gone for good. He'd left a short note on the counter. "You were right. About everything. I'm sorry." There was no signature, no promise, no destination, just apology and absence. Weeks passed. The for sale sign out front faded under the sun. A new family came to see the house, a young couple with a baby. I watched from my porch as the woman carried the child inside, laughing softly. The sound was unfamiliar here. When the moving truck finally arrived, I felt something inside me exhale. Not joy, not sadness, release. I walked across the yard that evening, stopping by the fence one last time. The air smelled of fresh paint and cut grass. A little girl's laughter drifted from the new family's porch. I rested my hand on the top of the fence, the same fence where Claire once leaned, to tell me her half-truths, and whispered, "Welcome home." Then I went back inside. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the moonlight spill across the street. The ghosts were gone now, all of them. The neighbor, the lies, the woman I used to be. But the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. Sometimes revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about choosing not to. I'd seen the worst of both of them, their shame, their weakness, and in the end, it hadn't broken me. It had stripped me bare, yes, but underneath all that loss, there was still something left standing. Me. I took a deep breath and let the night air fill my lungs. The cicadas hummed, the porch light flickered, and I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home anymore. That I thought was the real freedom. The next morning, the sun rose over Maple Grove Lane, like it always had, ordinary, golden, indifferent. I poured myself another cup of coffee and smiled at the new neighbors unpacking boxes. The world moves on. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to move with it. A few weeks passed before anyone realized Tom wasn't coming back. His truck was spotted once near Bloomington, someone said. Another neighbor claimed he'd been staying at a motel by the highway. I didn't bother confirming either story. When a man builds his life on lies, he deserves the silence of disappearing without witnesses. The neighbors treated me gently, extra waves offers, to bring dinner, sympathetic smiles that felt like bandages for a wound that had already scarred over. I thanked them all, told them I was fine, and for the first time, I almost meant it. But peace, I've learned, doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in pieces. Little acts that remind you you're still in control of your own story. So I started tending the garden again. The roses that had withered during that long summer of secrets began to bloom red and defiant. I painted the fence white, covered the small crack in the wood where Claire's pruning shears once rested. Each stroke of paint felt like an act of erasure and renewal. One afternoon, while sweeping the porch, I saw a letter half slipped under my welcome mat. The handwriting was familiar Tom's. My breath caught before I even picked it up. Inside was a short note. I've been trying to make sense of what I did. You didn't deserve any of it. I'm sorry, Margaret. You were always stronger than me. No return address, no phone number, just that. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my desk drawer beside the photographs and documents that had once defined my heartbreak. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't read it again either. Some apologies are meant to sit in silence, not conversation. The weeks rolled on, and the for sale sign in Claire's yard finally came down. A new family moved in. A young couple with 2 children, and an enthusiasm that didn't know the history behind those walls. The first morning after they arrived, the wife waved at me from across the fence, her smile bright and genuine. "Morning, I'm Jessica," she said. "We're so happy to be here." "Welcome to Maple Grove Lane," I replied, smiling back. As she turned away to chase after her little boy, I realized how different her energy felt from Claire's. Where Claire had been calculated and cautious, Jessica was simply alive. I found comfort in that, a reminder that houses don't hold ghosts forever. People do. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch. The sky was painted in streaks of lavender and gold. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the discovery, the quiet revenge. For a long time, I believed revenge meant making someone pay. But as the months passed, I began to understand that true revenge is simply clarity. It's the calm that comes when the truth no longer has power over you. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd just shown them who they really were and walked away whole. That was the lesson I never knew I'd been waiting to learn. One Saturday morning, Jessica came over with her daughter, a bright-eyed girl who couldn't have been older than 7. "She wanted to see your roses," Jessica said. "She says they smell like candy." I laughed and knelt down beside the girl. "You have a good nose," I said. "These are called Crimson Promise. They only bloom after the hardest winters." Jessica smiled. "I hope that's a good sign." "It always is," I said. When they left, I stood in the yard for a while, listening to the sound of the children's laughter drifting down the street. It filled the space where regret used to live. Later that afternoon, as I was cleaning out my kitchen drawers, I came across something I hadn't seen in months, a small seashell from that Cape May photo. I must have kept it years ago, back when Tom first returned from that business trip. Funny how I never noticed what it symbolized until now. I held it in my palm, its edges worn smooth, and then carried it outside. The sun was beginning to set, and the air was soft with the scent of cut grass. I placed the shell beneath one of the rose bushes and pressed it gently into the soil. "Stay there," I whispered. "Let something honest grow over you." That night, I invited a few neighbors over for coffee, the Donnellys, the young couple from across the street, even the new family next door. We sat on the porch, laughing about small things, recipes, the town fair, the weather. Nobody mentioned Tom or Claire. Nobody needed to. When the evening wound down, Jessica said, "You know there's such peace in this neighborhood. You can feel it." I smiled, looking around at the people who'd become my quiet circle of witnesses. "Peace doesn't just show up," I said softly. "Sometimes you have to build it yourself." They all nodded, not knowing how literal those words were. After they left, I sat alone for a while, sipping the last of my coffee. The moon hung low over the rooftops, and for once it didn't feel like it was watching me. It felt like it was watching over me. Weeks later, I received one final envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name. Inside was a check made out to me for the exact amount Tom had withdrawn from our old joint savings account all those years ago. The memo line read, "For what was taken." I didn't cash it. I placed it in the same drawer as his letter and closed it gently. Some debts can't be repaid with money. I turned off the lights, went to the porch, and looked out at Maple Grove Lane. The world was quiet again, but this time, it was the right kind of quiet. I realized then that the fence between my house and Claire's old one wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a monument, a reminder that even betrayal, when faced with grace, loses its power to wound. I smiled, breathing in the night air. The ghosts were gone. Autumn came early that year, the kind that makes the air smell like wood smoke and old leaves. The maples along the lane turned gold and then crimson, as if the whole street were exhaling after a long summer of holding its breath. I'd thought by now the memories would fade, but they didn't. They softened, changed color, like the trees still there, but no longer sharp enough to cut. Sometimes I'd find myself glancing at the house next door and almost expecting to see Claire's pale curtains fluttering or Tom's truck in the drive. Then I'd blink, and there would only be the new family toys scattered in the yard, laughter spilling through the windows. Life goes on, indifferent and kind. One Saturday morning, Jessica knocked on my door with a mug of coffee in each hand. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Please," I said. We sat on the porch steps, wrapped in our cardigans, watching the neighborhood come awake. She told me about her daughter starting second grade, about how her husband was fixing up the basement. Her words were simple, but they had a kind of healing rhythm. "You ever miss him?" she asked gently, and I knew she meant Tom. I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "Not really. I think I miss who I thought he was more than who he actually turned out to be." Jessica nodded. "I get that. Sometimes the idea of someone lingers longer than the person ever could." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rustle of the trees. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. "This neighborhood feels steadier with you here." That made me smile. Maybe she was right. Maybe the storm had passed so something steadier could take root. That afternoon, I drove into town to drop off donations at the community center. On the way back, I stopped at the small diner off Highway 10, the one where Tom and Claire used to meet. It had been repainted, new booths, new staff, but the smell of coffee and fried eggs was the same. I sat at a corner table and ordered pie. For years, I'd avoided that place like it was cursed. Now, I just wanted to reclaim it. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, smiled and said, "You look like you've been coming here forever." "Maybe I just look like someone who's finally come back," I said. The pie was ordinary, sweet, crumbly, a little too warm, but it tasted like closure. When I left, I didn't look back. That winter, I joined the library's volunteer group. We read to kids on Saturdays, organized used books for the annual sale. One afternoon, while shelving, I came across an old hardback with a note tucked inside. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without the pain. No author, no signature, Just those words. I smiled, thinking maybe the universe had a quiet sense of humor. Months turned into a year. The roses bloomed again that spring, fuller than before. People stopped by to ask for cuttings. Someone from the local paper even wrote a small article about the resilient garden on Maple Grove Lane. If they only knew the story behind it. Sometimes when I worked in the yard, the wind would carry bits of conversation from the new neighbors' plans for vacations, birthday parties, new beginnings. It was all so normal, and for the first time, that felt like a gift. One Sunday morning, while cleaning out my desk, I found Tom's old letter again. The paper had yellowed at the edges, the ink faint. I read it slowly this time. The regret was genuine, but the distance between who he was and who I'd become had grown too wide to bridge. I folded it, slid it back into the drawer, and whispered, "I forgive you." Not for him to hear, but for me to stop carrying it. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying it happened and I'm still here. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea and stepped onto the porch. The sunset looked like spilled honey across the rooftops. I could see the faint outline of the new fence I'd had built white clean, without the old cracks. It didn't separate me from anyone anymore. It framed what remained. As the sky deepened into twilight, I spoke softly, as if the street itself could hear me. "Some ghosts don't haunt us to scare us," I said. "They come back to remind us to see clearer love, smarter, and leave the lights on for ourselves." The wind stirred cool and steady, rustling the leaves like applause. I sat there until the stars appeared one by one, thinking about everything that had been lost and everything that had quietly taken its place. And when I finally went inside, I left the porch light on. Not for Tom, not for Claire, for me. If you've been listening this far, thank you. I hope my story reminded you of something important, that the truth always finds its way to the surface, and that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the decision to stop reopening the wound. If you've ever been betrayed, take a deep breath, forgive when you can, and plant something beautiful where the hurt used to live. And if my story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it. There's more to come.